Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tommy Marks. I am the Vice President and Council Engagement at the Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council. Today, we welcome you to join us for Session 2 of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which focus today will be on NIST SP 800-171, where our guest presenter we'll talk about the domain deep dive and break down the controls, your audit control, current posture, and surface priority gaps. Uh, it is my pleasure, indeed, on behalf of our president, Ms. Sharon R. Pender, the president and CEO of Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council, that we're able to bring to you this session. With the support of the SBA, the Small Business Administration, through a grant that she secured in order to help small and minority businesses understand what it takes to do the certification. And we have one of our own, actually, Mr. William J. McBurrow, who is the Chief Information Security Officer and the lead CMMC assessor at MCGlobalTech. They are a certified minority business by Capital Region, and they specialize in building the CMC alignment of cybersecurity compliance programs, and has been guiding defense industrial base companies in achieving and sustaining compliance since 2017. William told me not to eulogize him like I did the last time in June, so I'm going to stop there and let him take the baton and take us through this session. Thanks for joining us.
Tommy, thanks for that. That was more than enough. More than enough. So I appreciate the invite to do this again. I know we have a third session scheduled for August. But it's an absolute pleasure to be back here with you all, and to just talk more about things that I talk about all day long. But I think it's more meaningful for me to do it here because as a fellow certified MBE, I understand the challenges that we all have as small businesses trying to navigate the federal market. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen and kick us off here. So I believe is all right. So this is session 2 of our CMMC training series. We're going to focus on sort of the underlying standard that the CMMC program enforces. And this is the NIST SP 800-171. We'll talk about some of the implementation models and some of the architectural strategy that MBEs can adapt when trying to maintain this level of security compliance. Again, this is session 2. My thanks to the CRMSDC for having me and putting on this event. My thanks to the SBA for continuing to support our efforts as we engage with our fellow small business communities. So, as Tommy mentioned, my name is William McBurrow. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at MCGlobalTech. We are a minority-owned small business certified MBE government contractor. So we do a lot of work both in the public sector and in the private sector. We support state and local government agencies. But I've been doing this work for over 25 years, supporting firms both in the public and private sector, helping them build security governance programs. And a lot of the work that I do, I'm going to be talking about here over the next hour and a half or so. One of the things that I did want to share is my new book. And this is a book that I wrote specifically to help clients that we've been advising over the years about how to take the work that we've helped them develop and move it forward. So this is called Beyond Compliance. It is a governance roadmap for a sustainable CMMC level 2 compliance program. A lot of the challenges that particularly small businesses have is that in order for them to continue to engage the marketplace, they have to be able to continuously demonstrate their compliance. And a lot of challenge that our small business clients have is that they could engage us to help them build a program, but it really didn't have the capacity or even the capabilities to maintain and sustain that program. CMMC is not an IT problem. It's not even a security problem, right? It's a governance problem. And CMMC as a program validates the NIST 800-171 standard for governing controlled unclassified information within the organization. So whatever I attempted to do here in this book is to provide a roadmap of how small businesses can govern their compliance program moving forward, how they can sustain all the things that we're about to talk about here the next hour or so. Lastly, quickly about MCGlobalTech. We are a CMMC level 2 certified small business. So all the things that we're going to chat about here, shortly are things that not only do we advise clients to do, we also do ourselves. We live with this, right? Because again, as a defense contractor doing cybersecurity work, we encounter CUI all the time. It's important that we be compliant, so we are a CMMC level 2 certified organization, and we eat our own dog food here, as they say. So I want to take a quick second to do a brief recap about session 1, which was about a month ago, and that was recorded and shared with the participants then, and I believe this session is being recorded as well. So in session 1, we talk about the fundamentals of the CMMC program. The CMMC is an acronym that stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. We talk about the fact that CMMC is just the government's attempt at verifying security requirements that have been in contracts for over a decade, right? CMMC imposes no new security requirements, right? It's just a scheme to validate that contractors are implementing the security controls as required. So we talk about the structure. All that is in the session 1. For a recap, you can go back and watch that as well. We talk about the 2 classifications or 2 categorizations of data that the CMMC program impacts. This is federal contract information that requires CMMC level 1. CMMC level 1 is essentially a requirement for the basic safeguarding requirements within the FAR, right? So what that means is that every government contractor needs to be CMMC level 1 because as a government contractor, you receive FCI. CMMC level 2 is a validation of the NIST SP 800-171 standard that is, again, a federal government-wide standard for protecting controlled unclassified information. Although CMMC is a Department of War program, CUI is not a DOW classification. It's a federal government-wide classification, right? So every federal government contractor potentially could receive CUI. We talked about some of the best practices for CUI management, but importantly, we talk about some considerations for how you scope your CMMC program. Scoping as a term is very important because that determines what is within your compliance program and what is outside of your compliance program. CMMC as a certification is a validation of your information system to protect control unclassified information, to protect the flow of this data within your organization. It doesn't necessarily have to be your entire organization, right? So your CMMC information system doesn't have to be your entire company, all of your networks, all of your systems, all of your users. So how you scope that program based on who needs to potentially access CUI, what systems need to be used to access CUI, where CUI is being stored, have significant impacts on the cost and the level of effort of maintaining your CMMC compliance program. So all these things we chatted about in session one. Now, let's talk about some of the recent updates in the CMMC program. There has been a lot of conversations in the defense space, particularly because on July 13th, which I believe was last week, the department suspended the phase two requirements of the CMMC rollout. There is a lot of verbiage around the fact that CMMC has been suspended. The program has not been suspended. The future rollout of phase two, which would have required third-party audits for defense contractors, that was slated to start in November 10th of 2026. That date has been suspended pending a 60-day review, particularly around cost concerns impacting small businesses. Okay, so as of last week, the phase two rollout of the program has been suspended. However, we're squarely within phase one, and phase one is still in effect. What does CMMC phase one require? Right, phase one started in November of 2025. It requires you to submit a self-attestation that you have completed your implementation of the NIST 800-171, meeting all the controls to the SPRS, the SPRS. Okay, this is important because that self-attestation in the SPRS is unlike the previous NIST 800-171 score submission. If you intend to submit your self-assessment attestation in the SPRS, that attestation requires you to individually attest to each of the 110 requirements to say we have done this, we have done this, we have done this, we have done this. Okay. And at the end of your attestation, there is a personalized attestation from a senior leader within the organization. They have to put their name down and say, I, William McBurrow, am attesting that MCGlobalTech has fully implemented this program as we are attesting to here in the SPRS. Now, one of the things that I often do in my say in my conversations in this past week with defense contractors is that if you fail a C3PAO audit, and the C3PAO are the organizations that come in and perform these third-party audits, there's no liability tied to that, right? And they just tell you you didn't pass, and you go back and try again. However, if you attest to the government that you are compliant, and that attestation cannot be verified if it needs to be, you are subject to liability. And as someone who is affirming personally to the government, you are subject to some levels of personal liability, right? So there are False Claims Act prosecutions that are ongoing. You can look that up. For organizations that turned out that year, the self-attestations that they were fully compliant turned out to not be true. So there's value in having an expert come in and take a look at your implementation so that you're able to attest with confidence. However, we're in a phase where the future rollout of the phase two of the CMMC program has been suspended. No change to your current obligations to protect CUI. No change to your current obligations to implement the NIST 800-171 standard. No change to your current obligations to submit your self-attestations in the SPRS. Okay, so that's where we are today. The department is looking at ways potentially of alleviating some of the impact on small businesses. I do not foresee a future in which to come back and say do less security because we live in a very hostile world. Okay? But this is where we are with the suspension of the program. Now, what does that suspension mean for us small businesses, us fellow MBEs, right? Um, this means we might have a little bit more time before we have to bring in a third party to validate our work, right? What suppliers should be doing is looking at this as a pause in that third party audit requirement, giving them more time to fully implement and meet these controls. Controls, again, that have been on the books for over a decade, controls that are in current contracts by virtue of the DFAR 7012 clause, controls that when you sign a contract, you are telling the government that we have implemented all of these things. Okay. You still want to perform your ongoing self-assessments. You want to continue your self-attestations if you have not done so. Attestations are required on an annual basis. There's been no change in your contractual mandates, right? The only change has been changes for the requirement for you to get audited by a third party auditor. However, there are value in you having your security posture validated. MCGlobalTech, as a company, we did that. We have had a third party come in and validated our implementation of these requirements, right? And we have to be very careful as we're making these attestations now, because now there's personal liability tied to that. What we're also seeing in our travels sort of across the DIB is the fact that large prime contractors are not letting up on having their supply chain implement these requirements and get themselves certified. Because without the requirement of a third party certification, right, the responsibilities now rely squarely on the prime contractor who has the agreement with the government to ensure that their suppliers are in line, right? And large primes are not trying to, incur that additional risk, that additional liability. They're still requiring that their supply chain be ready to demonstrate to a third party that they are compliant. So that's what the state of the current state means today. So when we talk about the CMMC program, the CMMC program is a validation scheme of the NIST 800-171 standard. This standard consists of 110 specific security requirements. Okay. Some of these requirements are technical. Some of these requirements are administrative. They're policies, they're sort of governance in nature. Some of these requirements are operational. The organization has to do certain things a certain way at a certain frequency. These requirements are divided up into 14 what is called control families, which is categories of the requirements, and they're evidence-based. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have fully implemented these requirements. So this 110 security requirements are expanded into 320 specific assessment objectives. So when you get audited, you have to be able to demonstrate that you have met 320 specific security requirements. When you go into self-attest into the SPURS, you are self-attesting to the 110 control, but at each control, the systems identify the applicable assessment objectives. So there are 320 specific assessment objectives, according to the NIST 800-171 revision 2, that you have to comply with. This is a lot, to be honest with you. It is a lot for organizations that are not structured to have an enterprise level governance program. Okay. One of the things I did in my book is try to map out how a small organization could tackle this. But yes, this is a lift. So these are the control families, right? And we'll walk through them one at a time. There's access control, right? There's awareness and training, again, non-technical in nature, right? It's audit and accountability, the configuration management, right? Identification and authentication. There's incident response, right? Maintenance of your environment, protecting your media. There's personnel security. This is a non-technical requirement. There's physical protections if your physical locations are within the scope of your compliance program. There's managing risk, right? There's assessing your program, and there's protecting the communications and the systems that are within your compliance scope. As I alluded to in some of the previous slides, some of these are technical in nature, and they can easily be handled by technical staff, by either an internal IT personnel or by an outsourced MSP. Some of these requirements are governance in nature, right? It's not something that your MSP can do for you. You have to be able to govern the IT function, right? Some of these are operational in nature. Someone has to do something on an ongoing basis to be able to sustain compliance. But these are the 14 families. So let's walk through them one at a time. So access control. Before I even go any further, one of the things that we talked about in the previous session was how do you determine the scope of your compliance program, right? Because determining that scope has a direct correlation to the level of effort, right? When we're working with clients, strategy number one is can we minimize that scope as much as possible, right? We have a fully CMMC compliance operations as a service offering that we totally remove that scope in totality from the organization. But when we talk about controls, we're talking about these controls relative to how you have defined your scope. So if we're talking about access controls, we're talking about limiting access to your systems. Now, what are these systems, right? These could be your desktops or laptops, if they're within scope. These could be your cloud systems, your Microsoft 365s, the Google Workspace, or sort of, AWS or what have you. This could be any type of SaaS or cloud-based software that you are using in execution of your contract with the DoD, right? But you have to be able to limit access to authorized users and authorized systems. Okay? And there are certain criteria on how you manage this access, ensuring that users don't have more privilege than they need to perform their functions, controlling how these systems can be accessed remotely, specifically controlling access to controlled unclassified information, ensuring that you have separation of duties where a single employee or single staff member doesn't have all the power to sort of compromise your system without anyone else knowing. But the access control family is a very technical family, right? And it takes more than just having, someone configure, MFA on your laptops, right? So when we talk about limiting system access to authorized users, what constitutes an authorized user? How do you identify users that are authorized? How do you authorize them? Is there an audit trail that shows that this user has access to CUI and this user is approved? Where is the approval? Right? So there's a lot of procedural aspects of managing your CMMC program. Right? If you're using a system like a Microsoft platform or Google Workspace, just showing me users, if I'm wearing my auditor hat, I'm a lead CMMC certified assessor here. I'm saying that, okay, you've shown me users that are in your system. Show me that these are the users that should be in your systems. How did you authorize them prior to them gaining access? Right? And you have these users. How do you ensure that on an ongoing basis that the users that should have access are the only ones that do have access? How often are you reviewing these access? Right? Are you reviewing access logs? Are you reviewing accounts? How often are you doing that? Are you doing that monthly, quarterly, biannually? Right? There's a lot of operational processes that are required to control access to the environment that you need to be able to demonstrate to an auditor. Next, there's awareness and training, right? There's a requirement that you educate your users of CUI on the risk associated with access in CUI. Are you providing them security awareness training? right? The DoD has a mandated CUI training that they make freely available to the DIB, right? Are you ensuring that prior to access to your systems, users have completed all the required training? Do you have a process for rolling out this training on an annual basis? Do you have a process for validating that the training is completed? Do you maintain training logs? Right? These are all things that are required under the awareness and training um, family, right? Um, CMMC also requires role-based training, right? So, for example, the folks that have administrative access to your IT systems require a different set of training than your average CUI user. So if you are the one tasked with securing the IT systems, have you been trained to perform that task? Are you able to demonstrate that you have the requisite training on the technologies, right, that you are tasked with securing, right? Role-based training, right? CMMC requires that you designate a security officer within your organization or within your information system who is tasked with ensuring that the security of the system is maintained. Is that individual trained, right? Being a system owner, being the owner of a company, does not automatically make you a trained security officer, right? So you will have to be able to demonstrate that the person who is tasked with doing security has training to do security, right? Otherwise, they cannot make risk-based decisions that impacts access to controlled unclassified information. And there's an entire family around being able to audit and maintain and track accountability of actions within your system that impact CUI. The only way you can do that is if your information system is configured to track and log activities within their environment. Okay. So are your systems configured to maintain logs? When I log into a system that has CUI stored on it, is there a log of that access generated? Is that log collected? Is that log aggregated? Is that log reviewed by anyone? How often are these logs retained? Right? Is the information in the log sufficient for me to go back and say on this day at this time this individual accessed CUI? Okay? That's the level of logging that is required to control and maintain accountability of controlled unclassified information. Very often, the systems that we use are capable of generating log and generating tracking. If you're using a Microsoft 365 environment, every time you access, a log is generated. But what we often see is that the logs may be generated, but they're not being reviewed by anyone, right? And there's no processes that document how their review process should occur. There's no evidence that an organization can show me that says that here are our logs, here's our review schedule, here's our process for what happens when we see something in these logs that require us to take action. And all of these things are documented, right? Part of maintaining governance, what I talk about in the book, is again, having a program in which there's someone tasked with ensuring that these types of activities that are supposed to occur are occurring. Okay? If you're outsourcing to an MSP, it is on you, the organization, to ensure that they are performing these log reviews and they are providing evidence back to you that these log reviews are occurring. If you're an organization without an MSP and you're doing internal IT, right? Do you have the ability to aggregate these logs? Do you have the ability to correlate these logs? To be able to say that a system was accessed over here, a system was accessed over here, system was accessed over here, and I'm able to bring all of these logs into one place. So I'm able to trace activities across our information system because that's how we identify potential security incidents. Right? So all of these, there are detailed requirements within the audit and accountability family that, yes, are very technical in nature. Your information system needs to be able to generate these logs. You need to have the capability to aggregate these logs and correlate them, but you also need to have the operational capability to monitor them and to understand what you are looking at and to be able to make risk-based decisions on what it is that you're looking at. Okay. As part of our compliance operations service, we have someone tasked with taking a look at these at logs, within our enclave, on a daily basis. Right? Now, we're leveraging technology to make that process easier, but CMMC requires you to be able to identify when there's a potential security incident, and the only way you can do that is by tracking activities across your information system. So let's talk a little bit about configuration management. Yeah. Um, this is a significant gap that I come across in most organizations that we speak with, right? Um, Managing your systems requires you to be able to control changes to your systems. It requires you to be able to first establish what a secure baseline looks like. It allows you to be able to enforce that baseline across your IT systems. It requires you to be able to track and document and review and improve every change from that baseline. Okay. Um, if you do not have a formal change management process in which changes to your IT systems are requested, those changes are documented, those changes are reviewed from a risk perspective and approved, those changes are implemented and they're validated and there are records of these changes, you are not compliant with what NIST 800-171 requires. Right? It requires you to maintain an established baseline, and it requires you to control that baseline. You cannot do that if your systems are unmanaged, right? You can only do this in an environment where your systems are controlled and your systems are managed, and they're managed to a level where you've documented the current posture and you're able to maintain that posture and you're able to identify when to deviate from that posture. Okay. A lot of organizations can show that what changes have occurred within the systems in the past 30 days, right? What are the changes? Who approved it, right? Who reviewed these changes from a risk-based perspective? When you're dealing with systems that impact CUI, every change needs to be controlled. And that
Hey,
takes,
William,
yeah,
we have a couple questions here for you.
I can take them.
Okay. I'm going to start with Raymond Mathis. He said, regarding access control, if you are a one-man shop, you automatically fail since there's no one else that can perform. You automatically fail since there's no one else that can perform the internal audits and separation of duties, correct?
Okay. So there is a separation of duties requirement. If you are a one-man shop, that means you are the person who is approving these changes. Okay. Um, you will not be able to meet the separation of duty specific requirement. However, that is not a requirement for me as an auditor that is going to fail you. I just need you to be able to control the changes and document the changes that you are approving yourself to make. Right? So you're still practicing change control and you're still maintaining control of your system. But in practical terms, the only way to address having multiple individuals with access is you hiring an extra person just to satisfy that requirement. I live in the real world, right? So as long as you are able to document and demonstrate how changes are controlled within your environment, me as an auditor is not going to count that against you. That make sense?
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you. He said, makes sense. Thank you. The next question is from Hussein Jeffrey. William, you mentioned you have to prove that the person who I'm sorry. William mentioned you have to prove that the person who has been hired for a specific security position has been trained for that position. Will a person's certifications, i.e., CISSP, Sec Plus, etc., that they are trained, or do you have to conduct a specific training? So will
Certification
a person?
suffice.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So certification suffice, right? I'm a CISSP. A CISSP requires me to do continuing education credits, whatever they call it now, continuing professional education (CPEs). So every year to maintain that certification. So yes, if you are maintaining professional certifications, that count.
Okay, and that's all of our questions for now.
All right. So keep them coming. Stop me at any time, so that I can address them, as they come in. So as a small business ourselves and as an organization that supports a lot of small businesses, we take a real world view of compliance, right? Because the ultimate goal is for you to protect the data and demonstrate that you have met the spirit of these requirements. Right? There are certain things that are not feasible or not practical, right? So is it possible for a one-man shop to maintain a CMMC level of security compliance? Yes, it takes some doing, but the goal is to tailor your compliance program to fit you and not try to meet something that does not apply to your organization. Okay, where were we? So we talked about configuration management. I am going to jump ahead a little bit and talk about, I'm going to do something a little bit different. What time is it? Let's go back. All right. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to circle back here to do this. One of the things, so MCGlobalTech is a CMMC certified company. And we offer a CMMC compliance operation as a service offering. So what I'm going to do as I walk through these controls is I'm going to just share how we tackle them, right? So that you all can see what real world implementation looks like. Okay. Within our IT systems, one of the things that I talk about for access controls was ensuring that, hey, the users are sort of authorized. So for clients that we onboard onto our enclaves, there are, access request forms that the system owner has to fill out for every user that gets access. So there's a form to get approved, that form. On that form to determine the level of access that is required. And based on that form, that access is implemented, right? And on a weekly basis, I have a security analyst that is going through all of our systems, ensuring that the users in that system match the list of users on our system inventory, right? We are controlling access. Users within our enclave do not have administrative privileges. Administrative privilege are only granted to administrators of our solution, right? So users have access to CUI. Our admins don't have access to CUI, but our admins have access to administer the system. Again, access control in real time, right? We talk about awareness and training. All users that onboard to our system get provided our security awareness training. They are provided the links to the DoD provided or the DoW provided mandatory CUI training. They are provided links to the DoD provided insider threat training. And as far as role-based training is concerned, we have all of our staff maintain security certifications, okay, as well as CMMC specific certifications, RP, CCP, CCA, etc. All of these are maintained on file. We get audited all the time. We are able to provide this at any given point. So on any given day, I'm able to demonstrate to an auditor training records for all users, for all admin staff, myself included. Okay. When we talk about auditing and accountability, right? System access, we have platforms in which every time a user accesses our Enclave solution, a log is generated. That log is aggregated into a security monitoring solution. And every single day, I have an analyst that is staring at a dashboard that is reviewing alerts, that is reviewing, logs to ensure that activities within the Enclave is performing as advertised. Right? All of these things are done on an ongoing basis. Configuration management. Okay, I talked about how maintaining the baseline is important, right? We have a standardized, approved baseline system configuration for all of the technology within our Enclave. Okay, all of this has been vetted and audited by a C3PAO. So when we onboard a client, we are deploying this standardized baseline security in a configuration set. Any change from that baseline requires a change request, which is reviewed. And if it does not impact the security of the Enclave, or it does not impact the compliance of CUI, an exception is made and documented for that change. So we are maintaining change control across every change in the environment. If I need something changed within the environment, I have to submit a request to our CTO. He has to review it, approve it, document it, and that change gets implemented. We are implementing change control. And again, these are all things that within your organization needs to be done. If you are relying on a third-party MSP, these are things that they need to be able to do because they are going to need to be able to demonstrate that from your compliance perspective. Okay. Identification and authentication, right? So in access control, we talked about identifying who our authorized users are. How are your systems configured to validate that only those users are the ones that have access to your systems, right? There's a requirement for unique accounts for every user, strong passwords for every user, multi-factor authentication implemented for every user, right? And these are, again, the technical requirements that enforce access controls, ensuring that you are able to identify every user and you're able to draw a line between an authorized person and their designated account, right? And you are able to demonstrate that these accounts are configured with strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the common challenges that we see are the fact that organizations sometimes use shared accounts. Shared accounts are problematic. Why? Because if you have multiple people using the same account, going back to audit and accountability, you aren't able to look at a log and say user X did this. Why? Because it could be any number of users because they are sharing the account. And that is why shared accounts are not allowed. Things like maintaining passwords, things like password changes, developing these standards for managing accounts within your organization, right? One of the things that you find is that Microsoft is increasingly moving away from the idea of a password, right? And they are leveraging multi-factor authentication to protect access, But again, there are specific requirements in how you control and authenticate users to these systems. And within our solution, MFA enabled for everybody at all times, right? And again, you have to be able to. Now, if you are using standardized technology stack, right? Enabling MFA is just, a flick of a switch, right? However, If you're using some other type of software that doesn't have this built in, there are options for third-party add-ons that can enable this MFA functionality. But if you have a system that contains CUI that is used to process, store, transmit, or protect CUI, you need to have multi-factor authentication enabled. All right. Did a question pop in? I think I saw that. All right.
Yeah, it was just about, it was asking if the webinar was going to be available for review afterwards, which I was typing, yes, it will be available along with the presentation and the past webinar, last month's webinar will be available as well.
All right. Excellent. Incident response. Right? If you are auditing and you are tracking activity within your environment, this enables you to detect, right, when there is a potential security incident. What is your process? What do you do when there's a security incident? Right? There's a requirement here for you to build an incident response capability to train whoever is responsible for responding to incident, to ensure that there's a policy and a plan in place, to ensure there are defined roles and responsibilities within that plan, to ensure that the people who are assigned these roles and responsibilities are trained to perform them, to ensure that this plan is tested on an annual basis so that when you have to invoke it in real life, everyone knows what they're supposed to do. These are all parts of the program. These are not things that you just outsource to your MSP, right? Because again, responding to incidents, yeah, there's a technical aspect of it as well, but there's also an operational aspect of it as well. When there's an incident, who gets notified? What does that person do? Right? There's a requirement within the DFARS that you notify the DOW of security incidents that impact CUI within 72 hours. You need to have a process for doing that. Question?
Yes.
Yes.
It says, where and how can we get a list of the requirements needed to self-attest in the SPRS prior to going into the system so we can prepare properly?
Okay. So the NIST SP 800, can folks see the chat?
Yes, they can.
Okay. So it's the NIST Special Publication 171 Revision 2. Google that. Is publicly available. You can download it. It's in NIST speak, so it might take some, getting through it. But yeah, it is publicly available for you. Yeah. CMMC is just a validation of these requirements. Okay. All right. So back to incident response, right? You need to have a plan. You need to have a program. You need to have the capability to execute on this plan so that when there is an incident, you are able to detect it early, respond to it in time, right? And protect CUI as required and report to the DOW as required if CUI is impacted, right? A lot of organizations do not have the capability to detect incidents, right? You cannot see what you're not looking for, right? We are in an age now where cyber attacks are moving at the speed of artificial intelligence. Okay. Now, the technology that we use to protect against cyber attacks are also advancing at the speed of artificial intelligence, right? But we need to be able to keep up. And there's a requirement here that we have a plan of what to do when there's a security incident. Okay. And we need to be able to demonstrate that that security incident was handled. And we need to be able to demonstrate that our security plan that we have developed, that we have trained our staff on, that we have practiced, we test this on an annual basis. So within our Enclave solution, as part of our annual compliance exercise, we do a tabletop exercise that walks through different scenarios of what if, then what? What if something happened? What if a user has a malware attack? What if, a device fails? What if, right? And we walk through the various steps that we will have to do, testing our systems that we depend on to respond, testing our processes, testing our people to ensure that, hey, when this happens, do you know what to do? And this is a requirement within the standard. Okay. Maintaining our system, right? How do you ensure that your systems are maintained and they're updated and do you have the records to show that they are? Are you able to control access to it if you need someone to help you? Right? There's a lot of firms that we talk to on the smaller side that rely on employees to take care of their own systems. Right? Um, you know, First off, in a CMMC world, in a NIST 800-171 environment, you have to be able to control the configurations of your information system. You have to be able to monitor them. You have to be able to protect them. You have to be able to maintain them. All of the above in a verifiable way, right? You have to be able to demonstrate that you're able to do this every day, right? Um, you know, Operating in a way where every user is responsible for their own device is at odds with being in a fully managed IT environment, right? We have to be able to demonstrate that, hey, we are maintaining our systems. We have the requisite processes and restrictions in place if we need it to be sort of serviced by someone outside of the organization. But the goals of all of these is to protect the CUI that our systems are used to process, access, and store, right? A very common issue that we see is that, again, a lot of organizations rely on third parties to maintain the systems, but there's no real record, right, of how that maintenance is being performed. We work with a lot of firms that have their own managed service providers, their own MSP that they've worked with for years, and these MSPs have just, taken care of their IT needs, right? But in a CMMC world, it's no longer just, we handle IT now, right? Everything has to be governed. The systems have to be governed. Changes to these systems have to be governed, right? How the systems are maintained, that has to be governed. And a lot of these are requirements that your average MSP is not prepared to support because they're not compliance firms. Okay. So let's talk about media protection. So the requirements for CMMC follows the data, right? It follows the data in the cloud. If you're using cloud systems, it follows the data on hard drives. If you're using local devices, it follows the data on USB drives and portable storage devices. If you are using those as well, there are requirements for how you handle all of this to ensure that you are protecting both physical CUI, as in printed CUI, as well as digital CUI, as in CUI that is stored on electronic devices. Right? There are requirements around labeling, how you label these devices. There are requirements around encryption, the levels of encryption that is required. How you sanitize these devices when you no longer need them or are repurposing them. Okay? How you manage or control removable media. The first step of any CMMC program, the very first step is defining your scope. Where is CUI going to live? Where it is going to travel? And thinking through how can we minimize that scope as much as possible. Personnel security. This is not technical anymore, right? Personnel security is what is your process for reducing the risk of people access to CUI? What is your process for screening your employees? right? Before they are granted access to your sensitive systems, including CUI. What is your process for terminating them to ensure that the access that you have granted them is removed in a timely manner? Okay. And how are you able to demonstrate all of these? Being a CUI, being a CMMC in a certified organization and doing CMMC operations as a service. All of my staff, yes, there were interviews, et cetera, but we all did background checks, including me, right? We have background checks on file. Why? Because it is a standard process for every user into our CMMC environment must have a record that they have been screened, which includes a background check on file, right? And we have access forms for when users are onboarded. And we have standard operating procedures of all the things that happens when a user needs to be onboarded. We have standard operating procedures for all the things that happens when a user needs to be offboarded to ensure that all of the access that we granted them are being removed in a timely manner. Okay? So a lot of these are non-technical in nature. You have to have the processes in place for this. These are requirements that also flows down to your vendors. So if you are working with a managed service provider, an MSP, right? What is their process for screening employees? What is their process for terminating and transfers? What is their process for granting access and removing access? These are all things that are necessary. One of the things that often gets lost is that what happens when an employee is changing role internally, right? You might have an employee that has a role that requires them to access CUI, but move to a role that does not require them to access CUI, right? So what is your process for reviewing access when an employee role changes within the organization? These are all processes that must be documented and followed in a way that evidence can be generated to say that, yes, this is our process. This is the process that we follow. Here are the forms for the last user that was onboarded. Here are the forms for the last user that was offboarded, right? And we are checking the boxes and we're doing all the things because they're required. Okay. Physical security. If your physical locations is within scope. We work with a lot of clients that the CMMC information system is purely virtual, right? They do not have CUI within their physical facilities. They're accessing a cloud-based system or they're leveraging through sort of a virtual desktop infrastructure. But if your physical locations is within scope, there are things that you must do. There are protections that you must have in place. There are monitoring that you must have in place, right? There are policies that you must follow. Do you allow visitors? Do you not allow visitors? How do you track these visitors, right? How do you ensure that these visitors are only going to places that they're approved to go? Okay. Are you able to show them in the visitor log for all the folks that were non-authorized users that entered your facility within the last X months? Well, that is important. Our enclave solution is a purely virtual solution. There is no in-scope part, no physical locations that are within the scope of our CMMC compliance. So if you're going back to our example of the sole proprietor defense contractor that needs to be compliant, presumably that person is working from from home. There's an approach that can keep that person's physical location out of scope, right? They are working on a managed device that is connecting via a encrypted connection to the management systems as well as to the systems that are storing CUI within that information system.
We have a question, William.
Yes.
Okay. This question is from Hussein. He says, can you have MOUs in place where the MSSP that will cover how the MSSP is conducting physical security? And we use that, or do we have to have the documents and processes? Or do we have to have their documents and processes?
Okay. So let's talk about scope, right? All right. So these requirements flows down to your vendors, including your managed service providers, right? Because these are requirements, presumably these requirements are in your contract, are in your statement of work, that says that you will do certain things, you will maintain certain levels of security, and you will be able to validate to us that you maintain certain level of security. These things have to be in your contract. Now, if you are undergoing a third-party audit and you are using an MSP, and that MSP is managing your information systems that are used to store and process CUI, that MSP is by definition an external service provider within the scope of your CMMC program. They have to participate in your audit. So the question is, how do you validate their requirements? Yes, it can be contractual, right? Are you required to audit your MSP? The question becomes, how much assurance do you need, right? As an auditor, and I'm talking to an organization that has an MSP and their MSP is at the table, right? And I'm talking to that MSP about how they are doing access controls. I'm talking to them about how they're doing personnel security. I'm talking to them about how they're doing awareness and training. Yes, I'm talking to them about how they're doing physical security, right? So they have to be able to demonstrate to me, an auditor, that they were doing all of these things. Hopefully, they've already demonstrated to you, their client, that they are doing these things. Now, here's an important note about being an external service provider under CMMC. Under CMMC, you as the defense contractor, you are classified as the organization seeking certification, right? OSC or OSA. All of the NIST 800-171 requirements apply to you. Your MSP, who has administrative access to your systems that are within scope, is considered an external service provider. That external service provider does not have to be CMMC certified, but they have to be able to demonstrate their CMMC compliance within the scope of the services that they're providing you. And the way they're supposed to do that, firstly, start with what's called a customer responsibility matrix or a shared responsibility matrix. So as an external service provider on the CMMC, that MSP has a responsibility to look at the security controls and document how they are supporting each of the security controls that are applicable to their work. And they're supposed to provide that to you as an artifact. So if I'm coming in, not as an advisor, if I'm coming in as an auditor, I'm saying that you have an MSP, let's see the customer responsibility matrix. Okay? I want to see, and that customer responsibility matrix should tell me how they are meeting these controls. And I should already have in that document how they're doing physical security, how they're doing access controls, how they're training their personnel, how they're, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That should already be documented.
Okay, we have another question.
Sure.
This question is, I'm not even going to mess up the name. I'm sorry. How does one become a CMMC certified auditor, internal and or external, with minimum training or including minimum training, certification, and or experience?
Okay. So this goes to, so there's an organization called the Cyber AB, the Cyber Accreditation Body. They used to be called the CMMC Accreditation Body, and they sort of rebranded. This is the organization that the Department of War has an agreement with to manage the CMMC ecosystem, right? This organization has an agreement with Asaka. So if you're in the IT space, you know who Asaka is. Asaka has, they're a security training organization, right? So if you have, like, I have, the CRMSC, I have the CISA, and this is like the Certified Information Security Auditor, et cetera, et cetera. So Asaka is a security training organization that provides security training and certification. Asaka is the organization now, is ISACA I believe is .org, where you could get trained to be a certified a CMMC certified professional, which trains you on implementing the security controls. And then there's a subsequent certification called the Certified CMMC Assessor, which trains you on auditing the control. And if you meet the requisite requirements in experience, etc., you can become a lead CMMC certified assessor. So I am a lead CMMC certified assessor. And that matters because a lead CMMC certified assessor are the organizations that are the individuals that are certified to lead assessment teams. So if your organization gets audited, a lead CCA is going to be coming in with a team to perform that audit against you. Now, it is mandated that each CMMC audit has 3 CMMC certified assessors. One is the lead assessor, who is managing the engagement, someone at my level. Next is another assessor who is assisting in the engagement. And the third is a third assessor whose job is QA, is quality assurance for all of the assessment artifacts that is being gathered by the previous 2. But ISACA, ISACA.org is where you would go to get training on becoming a CMMC professional or a CMMC assessor. All right. Any other questions?
What are the qualifications for the QA person?
So the QA person has to be a certified assessor, right? And so in order for you to be that role, that means you have to, in order for you to be a CMMC assessor, you have to have already been certified for a CMMC as a CMMC professional, right? And there are qualifications that are aligned with that you have to be able to demonstrate and they validate in order for them to be able to certify you. So on the ISACA website, all that is provided. I mean, I don't recall off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've gone through that process. But right on the website, it tells you all of the certification requirements for you to be certified. But in order to do QA as part of a CMMC engagement, you have to be certified as an assessor already. All right. Any other questions?
Those are all the questions for now.
All right. So physical security, we've talked about that. Risk assessment, right? You have to be able to demonstrate that you are able to manage risk within your environment, right? You have to be able to, and being able to do that means things like performing vulnerability scans on your IT systems, performing formalized risk assessments periodically, at least annually, right? Tracking the risks that are identified, tracking the remediation of these risks within your organization, right? These are again, performing risk assessments is a discipline, right? It takes someone who is trained to perform risk assessments to do this work, right? But CMMC requires that happens on an ongoing basis, and you are able to demonstrate that, hey, we are monitoring for risks, and when risks are identified, we are remediating them in a timely fashion, and we are maintaining auditable records for what these are, as well as security controls assessments, right? So now CMMC has 110 security requirements. How can you be certain that you have implemented these security requirements and they are performing as intended, right? You have to review them on a periodic basis, right? So within our solution, we're doing monthly compliance reviews, right? We're looking at controls, and we are ensuring that our system security plan is always kept up to date, because anything that changes that could impact our documentation of our security program is documented, and our security plan is always updated. So we have an inventory of system security plan updates that as things occur within the environment that needs an update to our plan, we are making a note so that the next version of our security plan is documented. And it's current, and it's not just a document that is sitting on the shelf. It is a document that is reflecting our real security posture. So within CMMC, you're allowed to create a set of POAMs. So POAMs stands for plan of action and milestones. So when you identify a gap in your security compliance program, you need to document that gap and create a plan for how you're going to remediate that gap. And that's what a POAM is. Now, the important note here about POAMs is that we talked about the fact that we are in CMMC phase 1. And in phase 1, you are required to do self-attestations. This CMMC level 2 self-attestation is not the progress report of last year. In this attestation, you go in and you select each control and you identify whether you've met that control or not met that control. Now, the system only allows compliant attestations. That means you have to have a score generated by the system of at least 88 of 110. And the system does not allow you to submit non-compliance of any control that is a medium risk or a high risk control. The DoD has a published methodology for how they assign risk levels and risk scores to each of the 110 controls. Some are 1, some are 3 levels. Some are 1 points, some are 2 points, some are 3 points, right? And the idea is that they increase in points commiserate with the risk associated with not implementing them. The system is not going to allow you to submit a 3-pointer or 5-pointer as a non-compliant control. That means the system is only allowing you to submit compliant attestations. So where you are allowed to create a POAM is only on the low risk control requirements. And you have to be able to demonstrate that, hey, I perform my security controls assessment periodically. Here is the record of that assessment. Here are the gaps that were identified. Here are the plans that we have in place to remediate these gaps. And as these gaps are being remediated, we have the records to show that they were remediated. And you use an internal assessment for that. Okay. Within our solution, we do quarterly internal assessments, right? So that means every 3 months, we're going through that process to validate that the program is operating as intended, right? Your system security plan is meant to be a living document. It's not a document that you create and then the organization moves on, but a document is to reflecting things that were created for you, right? So this is meant to be a living document. All right. The last two, system and communications protection, is how you are protecting the flow and the transmission of CUI across your environment. The first step in that is knowing the flow of CUI across your environment. One of the artifacts that is required when you get audited is a network diagram that shows, right, the boundary of your information system, right? Our users are here, our systems are here, we're connecting to this cloud over here, we have an MSP that sits over here. All that should be in your system diagram. But your diagram should also denote in your system diagram or in a separate diagram the flow of CUI. So when organizations hire us or try to hire us or come to talk to us about CMMC, the first question I'm asking is, how are you accessing CUI today? How do you receive it? Who receives it? How is it received? Where is it stored? Who accesses it? Where are they accessing it from? Etc., etc. Trying to denote the flow of CUI within the organization. Now, a lot of organizations say, we don't have any CUI. Great. CMMC certification, CMMC compliance is less about whether or not you have CUI. It's about, do you have an information system that can secure CUI that you could potentially receive in execution of a contract with the DoW, right? So it's not about, do I have CUI today? It's, do I have the ability to protect CUI if I were to receive it? That's the criteria. So if you're an organization that is forward-looking, forward-thinking, the question then is not, where do you have CUI? right, is, okay, what's going to be your process for receiving it? Okay, what is your authorized means for taking CUI in? What is your authorized storage locations? Who are going to need to be authorized to access it? And what controls are wrapped around that entire process? CMMC has requirements for encrypting CUI in transit. Are we leveraging systems that are able to give us the requisite encryption of CUI in transit? This sounds hard, but it's really not. There's a lot of enterprise class systems out there built for small businesses that can handle this very easily. Okay. Lastly is system integrity. How are we maintaining the integrity of our information system? So it goes back to the example of small business that have users managing their own devices. The question then becomes, how are you maintaining the integrity of devices that you do not control? Right? How are you identifying system flaws? How are you reporting them? How are you correcting them? And how are you tracking all of this in an auditable way? Right? Are you leveraging vulnerability and patch management services? Right? Are you leveraging malware protections? Are you doing security monitoring? These are all enterprise class capabilities. Solutions exist for small businesses. So our managed solution starts from 1 to 3 users, right? But these are capabilities that you have to leverage because they tie specifically to how we meet these controls. And you have to be able to do that in an auditable way. All right. If there are no questions, I know I just ran through a lot there. I'm bringing it home here soon. What are some common implementation challenges, right? Lack of resources, lack of budget, and there are technological barriers. The biggest barrier that I see is the operational barrier. CMMC requires governance. Governance is a discipline. You don't just wake up and do governance, right? A lot of organizations within the defense industrial base do not have the capabilities to do security governance at the enterprise level. And that's what is required for CMMC. Now, one might ask, if we have small businesses, why are we requiring them to do enterprise level security? The security requirements here are tied to the classifications of data, not so much to the organization. And that's some of the things that the DOW is sort of grappling with right now, is how do we come up with more cost-effective ways to keep small businesses within the DIB, but still protect our national security. Angel, is there a question?
Yes. It says many organizations can document a control, but consistently executing that control across teams is much harder. During assessments, what implementation failures do you see most often that aren't actually technical problems, but governance or decision-making problems?
I think the answer is directly in the question, right? I mean, CMMC is not a documentation problem, right? It's an implementation problem, right? So everything in your documentation, you have to be able to do. So the question is, what is your government's framework to ensure that you are doing the things and doing them at the cadence that is established by your policies and your procedures and your SOPs, right? One of the things that I talked about in the book that I referenced earlier in the training, and that's why I called it Beyond Compliance, right? A governance roadmap for sustaining CMMC. Why? Because the problem that you're alluding to is one that I see over and over and over and over again, right? Organizations get nice documentation and it's great, but they're not able to live up to what it says, right? So there has to be a process in which governance decisions are being made repeatedly, and there has to be someone who is tasked with ensuring that governance. And one of the things that I talked about in the book was the fact that that someone who is tasked with that role has to be given the bandwidth to perform that role, right? And that's necessary. A lot of organizations drift, but there's no one doing the governance, right? And there needs to be someone who has the bandwidth and the skills to do that. And in the book Beyond Compliance, I actually provide a roadmap to how that can be created within a small business. Okay. All right. So no other questions. Keep going.
No other questions at the moment.
All right. So we talked about I'm going to fly through these implementation options because a lot of it harkens back to what we talked about in session one, right? What are your options? On premise, you are leveraging local infrastructure, or you're leveraging some combination of local infrastructure and cloud-based services. Are you leveraging a fully cloud-based enclave? Uh, or are you doing an isolated enclave solution either on-prem, on site, or in the cloud? Or are you fully outsourcing your compliance operations? So let's walk through what these look like real briefly. So what's an on-premise infrastructure? That means you have IT infrastructure within your facility, and you were saying, I'm going to turn this facility and our infrastructure and our networks and all of our systems into a CMMC compliant infrastructure, right? Maintaining that, it's high level of effort, especially for an organization that does not have the need, right, for all of their users to be CUI users, right? I just got off the phone before I hopped on this training with an aerospace engineering firm that has 75 employees, but they're saying only 14 of them would need to access CUI. So the question is, am I creating a program for the 75 or am I creating a program for the 15, right? And that's what the challenges are. But option one is making your current infrastructure CMMC compliant. The next is some hybrid of leveraging what you have on site on site, as well as leveraging some cloud systems. A lot of organizations may have things like a local Active Directory server to manage their network. However, they are leveraging Microsoft 365 for like email or something of of the sort, or they're leveraging one of the several like CUI data management solutions that are cloud-based, right? So your infrastructure is on site, but to store CUI in the cloud, you are going to leverage some solution. There are a number, of them, out there, like the Prevail or Virtue or Ignite. I mean, I can give you a whole list. Now, the challenge with this is that it complicates your boundary, right? Your boundary is now both in the cloud and on premise. It increases the level of effort for maintaining compliance. But again, our recommendations that we've worked with clients that have done it all of these ways. And oftentimes they've landed on their final design just based on how they operate, right? So if you're doing some type of manufacturing or engineering on site, yes, your on site systems might need to be within scope, even though you are storing some CUI in the cloud. It brings some levels of complexity, but nothing that cannot be addressed.
We have a question.
Yeah.
It says, for organizations just beginning their CMMC journey, which governance capability gives the biggest return early on? Is it documentation, asset visibility, executive ownership, or evidence management?
I want to say all the above, but it all starts with leadership, right? It all starts with leadership. I come across too many organizations that outsource this work to like the IT team, right? CMMC is not an IT problem. It's not even a security problem. It's a governance problem, right? So executive leadership, I think, is one. It's a necessary first step. But I think secondly, getting the right help to help you determine your strategy is a close second, right? Um, Executive leadership is first because one need to discuss that strategy with someone who is in a decision-making capacity. But what is your strategy, right? What is going to be your strategy for controlling CUI, for managing your compliance program? Because that strategy starts with that strategy drives everything else, right? We get contacted by a lot of firms who are, hey, can you come in and do a gap assessments? And I'm like, I just talked to you for 5 minutes. You don't need a gap assessment. You don't have a plan to manage CUI. You have no ability to manage your devices. You have no governance in place. Like right now, it's all a gap, right? I could take your money and send someone with a checklist, but that provides you absolutely no value at all. Your starting point is what is going to be my strategy for my CMMC compliance. It is that strategy that helps you determine what is going to be my scope, because the scope is what determines what you implement, where you implement it, how much of it gets implemented. And if it comes to a point where you're doing a gap assessment, you are doing a gap assessment relative to your scope. You're not just saying, do we have MFA? Yeah, we have MFA. You're saying that these systems are within scope. Are these systems properly access controls? Let's walk down the list of access control requirements relative to these systems. Right? So strategy is kind of where you start. Where you start. It is important to note, CMMC certification is not a certification of the company. It is a certification of the information system to protect CUI. MCGlobalTech is CMMC certified. When we got audited, the auditor was not auditing our entire company. They were auditing our CMMC information system. That's what gets audited, right? So creating that strategy of where that information system lies, it could very well be your entire company, right? But very often it is not. We do government work, but we also do commercial work, right? So our CMMC scope is not our entire company, right? Now, leveraging a cloud-based infrastructure simplifies your approach to this, right? Because cloud systems provide you a lot of the access and identity management capabilities, the data protection capabilities, the logging and monitoring capabilities. It provides you the technical capabilities that you then need to operate yourself, right? So you need to bring the operational capability, but you're not building and installing and maintaining infrastructure because it's cloud-based. Most organizations today, are sort of cloud-based. Like my organization is entirely cloud-based. Okay? So now when we start to think about how we reduce and simplify the scope of our compliance program, you hear the term enclave gets thrown around a lot. So enclave is a technology approach to isolate CUI activity in a defined environment. It reduces this complexity of your compliance scope and the size, it reduces the level of effort. And the benefits of an enclave-based solution is it provides you a smaller assessment boundary. It allows you to better segregate CUI from the rest of your organization, and you are able to predictably generate the artifact and the evidence that is required because CUI is controlled within a defined environment. There are a lot of organizations out there that offer enclave-based solutions. A lot of them are offering this as a technical solution, right? Hey, we can build up your enclave, or you can join our sort of shared user enclave, and we will do all the enclave management for you. You still have to do your own security governance. One of the things that I've written about, spoken about, a lot recently is the fact that what we've seen in the DIB over the years is that the biggest gap is not a technology gap, because you can just buy technology. The biggest gap is a governance gap. And most enclave solutions require you to govern it, right? They're doing the things, but you need to be able to govern the things, right? And that's why an option like our CMMC assured enclave was developed. And the reason why we developed this enclave solution was primarily because most of the firms that were coming across did not have the capability to sustain CMMC compliance. So we have a firm that we'll work with for 5 months, and we build up your security program. We give you hundreds of pages of documentation from policies and SOPs and so on and so forth, and templates. We stand up your enclave, be it on premise or in the cloud, and we could even get you past your audit. But you don't have no real capability to take that 30 days beyond the audit, right? So an enclave-based solution like the CMMC Assured Enclave is CMMC compliance operations as a service, right? You get all the benefits of an enclave solution, meaning you are able to isolate the CUI, you're able to maintain your compliance, you're able to separate your compliance scope from the rest of your company, but it's also a fully governed environment, right? So we are providing all the governance, all the security, all the compliance, all the management, all the operations, all the things within this environment that allows you to run your business exactly as you were the day before, but also give you a compliant way to access CUI. So it's CMMC compliant operations as a service. Now, one of the things that I have not touched on is around the conversations around Microsoft GCC versus GCC High. So Microsoft, who is sort of the market leader in productivity services within the DIP, most companies that I talk to use Microsoft in some way or form. They're using Microsoft 365. And Microsoft has its commercial cloud and Microsoft has its government cloud, right? And the government cloud is the cloud that is authorized for storage of controlled and classified information. The commercial cloud is not. Microsoft offers two flavors of the government cloud solution, the GCC and the GCC High. There are significant price differences between the GCC and the GCC High. Most organizations automatically think GCC High when they're thinking of CMMC compliance. And the reason for that is that Microsoft has done a great marketing job over the years, positioning the GCC High environment as the answer for protecting CUI. The difference between GCC and GCC High, first establishing that if you are using commercial Microsoft 365, that is not a compliant way to store CUI. So let's get that out of the way. The difference between a GCC and GCC High environment is that the GCC environment is compliant for all CUI that is not export controlled, right? Like ITAR. And the reason for that is that with the GCC environment, it is the underlying infrastructure is potentially supported by non-US persons, right? And if you have export control data, part of the reason it's export control is that you are preventing non-US persons from accessing it. Now, Microsoft says, and we believe them, that their staff is not accessing your data. However, if the staff has access to the underlying infrastructure as they do with GCC, you cannot store export control data in GCC. But if you are the majority of the defense sector that is accessing regular CUI and is not export controlled, you do not need to pay the added cost for GCC High. A GCC moderate environment suits your need just fine. Our CMMC Assured Enclave solution is built on the GCC environment as opposed to the GCC High environment. We did that as a conscious decision to be able to manage costs better for our clients. If we have a client that has export control data or ITAR data, then we use another add-on that is FedRAMP authorized to be able to, again, manage that export control requirement. But if you are looking at GCC versus GCC High is not the only option. It is the most expensive option. But if you do not have ITAR requirements, you do not need to look at GCC High. The regular GCC is fine. Our solution leverages GCC. All right. I've talked through all of these already about the technical capability requirements that are used to operate these environments, right? From MFA to identity management to vulnerability management, we're ensuring that regular scanning is happening. And again, you have the staff to do something about what it is that they're seeing, right? You are encrypting the CUI at rest and in transit. You are protecting your endpoints. You have a centralized logging capability where one is able to aggregate logs for all of your systems that are accessing and protecting CUI. You have an incident response capability for organizations, for when incidents happen. One of the reasons why, we created a compliance operations as a service model is because if you're looking at your average small business defense contractor where the owner is wearing all the hats, right? It's not possible to be an expert in all of these things, right? However, the standard requires it, and that's why as an industry, we have to come up with better solutions to meet the needs of small businesses. All right. I talked a little bit about gap assessments. So a gap assessment, you know, is in the name, so everyone knows what a gap assessment is. One of the things that I want you all to be very mindful of when you are thinking about gap assessment within the context of CMMC. Again, CMMC is a certification of your information system. The information system is the people, the processes, the facilities, the systems, and the networks that are within the path of CUI. Right? So when you're performing your gap assessment, you want to ensure that your gap assessment is focused on your CUI management system, and you're not just performing a generic gap assessment and saying, are we doing this and are we doing that, and so on and so forth. And based on these gap assessments, you want to create a remediation roadmap, right? And that roadmap should be based on your contractual deadlines, right? What your assessment objectives are, how you are prioritizing these gaps, right? And ensuring that you are balancing your remediation activities that is not impacting business, right? And ensuring that you are documenting your remediation within this process, okay? One of the things that I talked about, again, within our compliance management solution, we're doing quarterly compliance assessments. When gaps are identified, those gaps are documented, a plan to remediate them is developed. That plan is prioritized, and I'm tracking all of this to make sure that the team gets it done according to the milestones that we have established, right? But it's important that when you identify these compliance requirements, there's ownership, right? And you're coming up with the sequencing because you cannot do everything all at once, and you have some way of measuring progress. I talked to another DIB contractor earlier this morning who has been working with the MSP on CMMC type work since 2020, and they're still feeling like they're behind the curve. Well, that's because your MSP is not familiar enough with this work, and you are not able to actively measure that remediation roadmap to say, hey, these are the things we need to be done. Here's our schedule for getting these things done. So as you are tackling this within your organization, you want to create a roadmap of how you prioritize implementing these requirements and remediating these gaps, with a reminder that for current government contractors, for current defense contractors, we started phase 1 of the CMMC program in November of 2025. So this year, we, myself included, should all have our CMMC level 2 attestations within the SPURS. If we have a contract that requires us to do that. Remember, these are contractual requirements, right? So if you're an active defense contractor doing work that could put you in contact with CUI, you want to have your level 2 self-attestation in the SPURS. With an exclamation point on this particular point. When you submit your level 2 self-attestation, at the end of it, the affirming official, that is a term that was developed with the rollout of the CMMC program. The affirming official is the senior official within the organization who is personally attesting to the compliance of that company. So when we submitted our attestation for MCGlobalTech, my name, William J. McBorough, is in that attestation. And that is me personally attesting to the government that the compliance that we are attesting to is fully implemented and sustained. There's liability associated with that, right? So I want to make sure that the things I say we're doing them. All right. So we're coming up on time here, but just to give a real quick exercise here. So you have a 20-person company that has only 4 users that need to access CUI. This is very common. It is very seldom that you have organizations within the DIB that every user is a CUI user, right? So the question then becomes, what is the best implementation model? Remember, going back to what is our step one? Our step one, as we talked about earlier, getting a leadership sponsor. Step 2 is coming up with strategy. We're a company of 20 persons, and the 4 of us are going to be CUI user. Do we make the full company CMMC compliant and take on the maximum burden of cost? Do we segment our infrastructure to reduce, right? That means what? We are taking our infrastructure and we're saying this portion is for these 4 users, and we're going to isolate them here. This portion is going to be for the remaining 16, and we're going to separate them from our CUI users and maintain that boundary. Or we're saying that, hey, let's find an enclave solution and isolate them into that, and then we can work on the compliance and governance within that enclave. Or we're saying that let's use a managed security, a managed compliance operations option that provides us all of the operations and the compliance and the expertise that we need. Today, these are your 4 options, right? And the question that you should be asking yourself, you all get a copy of this slide, is which model reduces unnecessary scope? Which model is easiest to sustain? Which model creates a clearest evidence trail? And which model would we need internally to support, and can we do that? Okay. So to close, we are in phase 1, as I said, of the CMMC program. The NIST 800-171 is a broad security standard. We want to ensure that you are designing a strategy that does not expand your scope unnecessarily. You want to ensure that when you are looking at your gaps, you are looking at your gaps relative to your defined scope. You want to ensure that you are architecting a solution that reduces your compliance burden. And you want to look at options that are going to help you do that. All right. So with that said, are there any other questions that I can answer for you all?
Okay, we have a question that says, as organizations increasingly using AI to draft policies, procedures, and security documentation, what evidence would you expect to see that distinguishes AI-assisted documentation from evidence that a control is usually being performed, that is actually being performed consistently?
So you have identified a gap for me. I should have had a specific slide here on AI because that is so pertinent to this conversation. AI gives you very pretty things. I have read the most beautiful AI generated policies and SOPs. And as an auditor, it takes me 60 seconds or less to determine that this organization cannot do any of these things, right? It looks nice, but it's not reflective of the operations of the organizations. Now, I am the biggest proponent of leveraging AI in compliance work when we are building out our compliance infrastructure. So when I talk about the fact that we do compliance operations as a service, that means we're doing CMMC operations every day. That means we have policies, we have procedures, we have all the above. I leveraged AI to help me create all of those. But I didn't go to AI and say, create my SSP. I didn't go to AI and say, create my policy. It would have done that, and it would have looked pretty, but it would have also been totally unrelated to how we function. I mapped out exactly how we work, and I said, turn this into a policy. or take this policy that I have created based on our actual organization and create a standard operating procedure based on that SOP. And take this SOP and create a template based on this SOP. So all of this work, and each time I'm doing this, I am revising it, I am reading it, I am cleaning up things that don't apply. I am being no, go back, change this. No, take that, take this out. It's not us. No, we can't do this, remove that. And I'm going in and I'm engaging, right, with the systems that help me create this to come up with a deliverable that clearly reflects our reality. And that reality, we talked to an auditor, and an auditor vetted it and audited us against it. Are we doing all of the things that are in here? So I'm a huge proponent of AI enhanced documentation, right? But if you're just creating AI documentation to say I got documentation that has no relation to your actual operations, you are doing yourself a disservice and it's not really helping you at all. And I will start again where, and I will go back to where I started as an auditor who is steeped in this space. I know AI slop when I see it. All right. Any other questions?
There are no questions in the chat or the Q&A at this moment.
Okay. So I'm going to pause here. I know that you all are going to have get the recording. You're going to get the slide deck. My contact information is in the slide deck. I expect this to be a continuation of a conversation that started a month ago. I'm here as a resource to you all. I live this world. Like I said, I'm an MBE small business defense contractor. So we are eating this dog food every day. Everything that I say we all should be doing, we are operating this way because we have to. So I'm a resource to you all. Reach out to me if you have any questions. And I'm happy to engage at any time. All right. All yours, Tommy. You're on mute, I believe.
You're absolutely correct. Talking, voice bouncing back. Listen, on behalf of our president, Mrs. Sharon R. Pender, I want to thank you again for an outstanding presentation. And we look forward to your presentation in August. And for those people that joined us for the first time, as he mentioned earlier at the beginning, you can get session 1. It is online at our CRMSDC.org and on our YouTube link, and you're able to watch that session. And then along with what you got today, here's some things that we have coming up. And I was a little slow today because this slide should have come up at the beginning. But just so you know, this webinar series with CMMC ties in. We have an AI webinar series. The next two sessions are in August 20th for AI, and August 26th, William will come back and close out his series. All of the previous ones are online, available to the public, along with the handouts that he has provided. I'm already in August. In September, we have our annual golf tournament, which is a matchmaking event, a business-related golf tournament. And you don't have to be certified to come to the tournament and meet folks and network, but it's a great networking event. Been very successful year after year. And that is on September the 14th. You can go to our website and registration is open, and we're glad to have you out there. And if you don't know how to play golf, don't worry about it. We actually have a golf a class to pros that actually teach folks like myself who don't know how to play. So come on out and enjoy yourself. The date hasn't been set yet, but annually we do a day on the Hill led by our president, along with the affiliate presidents of the 22 councils that we are a family of, and it's where they that day go to the Hill and talk to legislative representatives about things that affect this community. And then we close out the year with our annual business meeting in December, which is open also to businesses that are not certified by us. So again, we want to thank you for coming out, and we look forward to a continued relationship. And want to know more about us, go to our website at www.crmsdc.org. Thanks very much.